Okay, well, you may remember that Tim said that business analysis is hard work, and we're gonna prove that true by not allowing a lot of time to run downstairs and get coffee, because we do have limited time, and we have quite a lot of ground to cover here. So I guess we can't expect a couple of people are gonna sneak back in again, and we'll accommodate that, so in the interest of being able to get going again. So. Now, having joined Tim at the panel, we have Russ Nichols, raise your hand, thank you, from CDCR, Director of the SOMS Project, and Eric Stein, Director, what do you keep calling that thing, Eric? Yeah,
Cross, yes, Cross.
The Cross Project and Board of Equalization. So, similar responsibilities, interesting. Russ is further down the pike than Eric is on his project, but I would like you to take a minute to describe a little bit about the project, some of that history, if you would, Russ, and the same thing, Eric, to provide the context for describing what you've done, in particular on the SOMS project, in terms of bringing in and training people on your project. So, please, Russ, kick us off.
So, as Stephen mentioned, I'm Russ Nichols from Department of Corrections. And the SOMS project, and give you just a little bit of background. Department of Corrections runs all the state prisons. We have 35 around the state, about 120,000, give or take, inmates at any given time, and about 50,000 parolees that we oversee. The SOMS project had the task of really modifying the business processes in the institution. So it used to be when an inmate came to us from a county court, they would get off a bus carrying a piece of paper. It was actually a document called an abstract of judgment. It said what the person did, how long they were going to be with us, just very basic information. And then we would bring them in and we would start a paper file on that inmate. And as they moved through the system and they saw counselors, got job assignments, everything went into that paper file. Well, an inmate in California moves around a lot, just within an institution, but across the state, depending on a whole bunch of things, the services they need, allergies, medical, a whole host of things drive that. So we had inmates that literally had legal boxes full of paper that would follow them around. To compound that problem, the processes in the prison all depended on that paper. Well, one person can have a piece of paper at one time. So our task was really to get rid of that paper. So we did two things. We digitized all the paper. We scanned all the paper that existed into basically Adobe PDFs, and we built a big system behind that does it. We also automated the business processes to stop creating paper. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, but to get there is really where the concept of the business analysts come in. And part of the reason that I tell you that story is, even though my title might be project director, all that is a glorified name that says, one, designated target. But really, I envision myself as kind of the chief business analyst on the project or the effort. Not in that I'm in there doing it, but I had better understand the business that I'm in and the business that I'm automating. And I think one of the things that was alluded to in the previous presentation a number of times is we need to not get caught up in the technology or the IT component of this. There are very few departments that say California Department of Corrections and Information Technology, or anything along those lines. We're here to support a line of business, and the business analysts are really the tie to do that. So as we go forward in the next hour, I'll tell you a little bit about how we did it and how we've leveraged that, and it's a little bit different than what was discussed before. And that's the other point I want to kind of drive home, is this is an art. Tim said that very specifically. Deepa was referring to the same thing. This is an art. You have to understand your environment. You have to understand what you're trying to do, the resources you have at hand. And that's part of being a project manager, project director, project sponsor, is understanding how to use those resources in your context, in your environment, to get to success.
So when you got rid of that paper that the inmate carry around, is it a number, is it a badge, what do they carry now?
So when they came in on the bus, they weren't actually carrying it. It was in a box under the bus. But we have an army, literally tens of thousands of people in the Department of Corrections we call case records managers. They manage those paper files. Tens of thousands, probably overstating that a little bit. But we had an entire organization behind that. We've greatly reduced the size of that organization, made it a lot more efficient with the technology, but what you're leading to is a lot of the change management behind that. The inmate is still identified by a specific number, and in our systems, we can type in the number, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. I can type in that number. 2 or 3 people can do it at the same time, bring up the information around, about the inmate themselves.
Sure.
I'm Eric Stein. I'm the project director for Cross, as Steve mentioned. My background is actually mostly consulting. I've got about 2 decades of experience, most of which I spent in the private sector consulting. And about 3 years ago, I joined the Board of Equalization. And I did so probably for some of the same reasons that you're here today. I was frustrated with seeing the challenges and some of the failures that we experience in the public sector. And it doesn't just happen in the public sector. I think Standish Group says that 32% of all projects actually succeed. So it's across the board. But as a consultant, you're always kind of whispering into the ear of the king, and you don't really have the authority. You'd like to make things happen. And I thought, well, someone said, hey, why don't you apply for this project director position? And I said, well, I'm not the guy, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And lo and behold, they hired me, and I have no regrets. Although I found out I'm not really king, I'm more like a target. Very good description of what a project director is. But one of the conversations that we had, and I really appreciated what you had to say, Tim, in terms of you got to be somewhat disobedient. I don't know if that was the word I'd use, but I
That describes my career.
yeah, exactly. But one of the things that we had early on was a frank discussion with the executives, and that was, look, these projects around the state of California aren't very successful. I mean, at the time I was hired, which was a little less than 3 years ago, we had a lot of things in the press. Things weren't going well. You'd open up the SAC-B and there's another project failure, right? So we sat down, we had a frank discussion, and we said, look, what makes us think we're going to be any different? Why are we special? Why are we going to be able to set out and succeed? And look, a lot of people who have gone before us, and they didn't end up where they want to end up. And they were motivated, they were hardworking, they were interested in success, they were bright people, and yet they end up in a John Ortiz article, right? So what sets us apart? Why are we going to be different? And really, the conclusion that we came to is, if we want a different result, we need a different approach. And so the approach that we've used at the Board of Equalization is this. We are doing what we call pre-implementation. So if you look at a project, there's really 2 phases, right? You have your procurement phase, followed by your implementation, typically. And in your procurement, what do? You write your ITPP, I guess they've done away with that now, but you write your feasibility study. Maybe you write a couple of special project reports. Maybe you write a budget change proposal. You write your request for proposal. You put it out on the street. You get proposals. Your evaluation team objectively sifts through them. You pick somebody. You go through your protest period. You write your Section 11, and then eventually you ink a contract. And what's happened in the meantime? You spent 3 or 4 years doing this. You know what you're ready for at the end of your procurement? You're not ready for implementation. You're ready to do a procurement, because that's what you spent all your time doing. You know how to evaluate proposals, you know how to navigate the solicitation process, but you're not necessarily ready to embark on your implementation yet, right? And in fact, in most cases, most organizations have really expected or counted on the system integrator to show up with the talent and the resources to be able to deliver. Because again, you're focused on getting through that solicitation. So we flipped it around and said, hey, we're not going to do just procurement followed by implementation. We're going to do pre-implementation. And during pre-implementation, one of the things that we do is the procurement, just one. And in addition to that, and in parallel, what we do is we get ready for data conversion. We do what we call data readiness. So we can mitigate the risk that data conversion always invariably poses on these big IT projects. So we do data readiness. We also do what's called program area readiness, where we fully define our business rules. So it's one thing you wrote your requirements in your RFP, and those are great, but they're very high level, and that's why the vendor shows up and does a bunch of JADs, right? Because they're high level. It's one thing, we're at the BOE, we bring in about $56 billion annually, and we register businesses, we collect taxes. Look, it's one thing to say, you got to register a business. That's nice, neat package. But it's another thing to say, in order to register a business, you have to I don't know what it takes. I'm not the business analyst guy, unfortunately, but you got to list your Secretary of State filing. You've got to identify your corporate officers. You got to have a valid address. Can't be a PO number. You've got to whatever these things are. To define all of those things in advance of having the system integrator show up is hugely beneficial, and it helps move your subject matter experts from being SMEs to actually business analysts, which is what is a cornerstone, I think, to the successful implementation. So we take care of, so we do data readiness, which is handling our data conversion. We deal with our system interfaces. So if you think about a big system implementation, it's kind of like replacing an engine in a car. You don't just throw an engine under the hood, slam the hood, and drive off. No, you got to connect the hoses. You got to make sure the motor mounts are in place. You got to make sure the fan belts are all put in place. I don't know anything about auto mechanics, but the point is, you got to connect some things, right? Well, those are your interfaces. And so why would we pay the vendor to come in and do all that work when we can do it in-house? And so we've spun up business analysts to go out and understand all of our interfaces and document them thoroughly, understand the transports, the variations. So that way we can actually be ready to do those connections that's absolutely integral to being able to pull off the implementation. That way the system integrator is actually focused on what they do best, and that is putting the engine in, and we can do the parts that we're good at. We know the business better than they do. So in addition to, so we do the data readiness, we do the interfaces, document our business rules. No one knows your business better than you do, and it's a lot more affordable to do it in-house as opposed to, what's the blended rate for these system integrators? I mean, how much do you pay these guys? $200 an hour blended rate? Why would I pay a guy? I mean, think about it, right? If I'm a system integrator, it's a cost benefits thing, right? I want to give a good resource to you. I don't want to charge you a lot for them, and I want to pay them very little, right? So it's going to cost you $200 an hour for a guy that maybe he graduated from college last month. I don't know. Probably a bright guy, but no one knows your business. No one knows your data. No one knows your systems. No one knows your processes. No one knows your business rules better than you do. So make sure your people are the one doing those things and providing the subject matter expertise that you can't import and have, you just can't bring it out. That's not out of the box. So, and in addition to business rules, one of the things that we did a lot of the business process mapping, which really became the foundation for documenting our requirements. I'm trying to think, a system inventory, understanding, if you put an RFP on the street, that tells me one thing. It tells me that your systems are deficient. You shouldn't have an RFP if you don't have problems, right? So where system deficiencies exist, workarounds exist. So, you walk into an organization and you say, okay, like at our organization, we have two primary systems. We have a big mainframe, natural database environment, and then we got something Power Builder, Sybase, all ring true for you. And, hey,
we have modern stuff.
So you're going to replace all this stuff. Okay, turns out, it's not just two systems. It's 180 that have been stood up over time. You got stuff in Access, you got stuff in Delphi, you got things on 3x5 cards, you got Excel, you got ACL, you got all these different, and you know what? Sometimes the IT shop doesn't know anything about them. I mean, they don't know anything about them. Your business spun it up because of these deficiencies, and guess what? Those things end up being change orders in the contract when you're actually in implementation. If you don't understand what they are and haven't disclosed them up front, because you try to roll out the solution and someone says, "Now wait a minute, what about this tracking that I do?" Oh, we didn't know about that. Well, those represent functional requirements you need to put into your RFP. They represent potentially, if you're going to get rid of them, data conversion requirements. If they're going to stick around, you may have to interface with them. And these are all the types of things that your business analysts can attack, make sure they're well understood, well documented. And I'll just kind of finish with this, because once I get going, it's hard to stop. So I'm just going to let you know I'm going to try to stop here. One of the things that was really exciting for me to hear was the gal, and I won't tell you her name because I don't want you to try to hire her away from me. The gal who leads our business analysts and directs all the subject matter experts, she said to me, people on the teams, people who report to her, these other BAs and SMEs, she said, all the time I hear, man, I thought I knew our business until I started going through and doing this work. So one of the things we've mitigated is the system integrator shows up and says, hey, tell us who your SMEs are, and we're all looking around going, I don't know. we've actually nurtured, we've fostered that skill set, and we're ready to go. We can hit the ground running when the vendor's there. So there's you said I could speak for 7 to 10 minutes. I think I made the cutoff. But so that's what we're doing at BOE. It's a different approach. I think we'll get a different result.
So pre-implementation activities, that's probably a new term for you, right? New for me. And doing a lot of business analysis just to get prepared, not to write the RFP, but to get ready for when the vendor shows up
Right.
on the ground.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to go toe-to-toe with the vendor
Right.
because your people are trained not just in the knowledge of the system, but how you do the analytical process.
Yeah, and one of the, not only, yeah, you're absolutely right. We actually have the expertise in-house. We have the business analysts in-house, and they're better than the guys who are flying in. I mean, the old joke about the guy who comes the furthest has the most credibility. Our people have the credibility. And one of sort of the interesting side effect of this, I said I'd stop, I lied. One of the interesting side effects is the team has really high esprit de corps. I mean, the morale is high. And I'd like to say that's because of my inspired leadership, but anybody who's worked with me knows that's not true. I think it's because our folks are involved in a meaningful way in the solution. They're not just on the sidelines, they're actually involved in what's happening, and their job matters. What they do matters. They're not standing by watching some consultant come in and do all the interesting work. They get to be part of it. And so I've been really excited to see just the low turnover rate. The team it's hard to hire people. I mean, it's really hard to find good people and hire them. And I still don't understand the HR processes, but the amount of people who've left is really small, and that's exciting for me to see. And I think that if the more we value our people and get them involved in this, the better the atmosphere, the attitude, and what you call aptitude and attitude, the more of that we'll see on these projects.
Wow. Now, I'm going to get back to Russ because he's got some more things to say. But before I do, Tim, did you want to build on top of what Eric has said so far?
I just think that, sometimes you make something, it's not a science project. Forget about projects. The consultants that are doing the business analyst work are not smarter than you. What they have is what a carpenter has. They have a toolbox. They understand how to come in and learn a business quickly and basically dissect it through a series of techniques and tools. 5 whys, process mapping. They have techniques, and they've been taught those techniques so they can go from line to line of business. So when we talk about core competencies and center of excellence, well, you have the business knowledge, which is a plus. You got to focus on building those, giving those your own analysts those techniques and toolkits, because that's the only difference between the $200 guy and your person is they've been trained up, they've been tooled up. So, focus on that as you build these core competencies.
You just gave away our secrets. So Russ, I want to come back and talk about some of the things that you've done on the SOMS project to tool up your people.
Okay. So going back to that title slide, how do you train folks? How do you grow people into this role? How do you organize your organization? How do you maintain it? So before I dive into that, how many folks in here are not IT classifications? Is there anybody? Oh, a couple, okay. So I'm going to offend everybody else in the room here in a second. So I absolutely agree. The folks that come in, they have business cards that have so many acronyms they wrap around to 2 lines on a business card. That's nice. They've got great training. They aren't your line of business. They are not what your department does. Your department is made up of the people who have been in it for a long time. And when we were talking about how do you train folks into this role, to a certain extent, I'm not sure that you can train it as much as you can grow it with the aptitude and the attitude. You're looking for the people who understand it, who are willing to jump in and swim and just dive in and peel the onion 1 layer at a time. If you've got that aptitude and that attitude, I can train you. I can work with you and give you the tools. But if you don't have those things, I can train you to the end of the day, and you won't be successful. It's a square peg, round hole type of situation. What we did on our project, and we did this early, is we made a significant investment in the line of business. And what I mean when I say that is we took a group of senior level business folks from the department and dedicated them to the project. And we call them the core team. We don't really call them business analysts, but that's what they are. They're not the folks that joined the department 6 months ago. They're not the folks that have only worked in one place. These are some of the senior level business people in the organization. And to drive that home, in our organization, we have, it's a military type organization. So you run through the ranks. Anybody that's familiar with the military knows a captain is a pretty high level. So we have a facility captain. That is somebody who actually runs a significant part of a prison. Because we're working so much with the records, we have a couple of people named, called case records administrators. State of California, entire state, has 11 of them. I have 3 of them dedicated to my project. And when I say dedicated, they're not an advisory group. It's not that they meet once a day. They've lived with me in my building for 4.5 years. And they were actually there a little bit earlier than that. They are the investment by the department. My project team is actually over half business people, not IT people. So if you want to automate your business, and remember, it's a business automation project, not an IT project, you're only doing it to get to a business outcome, you have to make that investment. And it goes back to exactly what Tim said. If it's a priority, if it is the culture of the department to say, I'm going to invest in this to get to an outcome, you have to keep the eye on the ball. You can't get dissuaded. You can't say, okay, I've got 19 number ones, and every line of business will do that. That's where you go back to politely saying no, or not yet, or why, or is it instead of? If anybody is saying, yes, we can do that, and that, and that, you're actually doing a disservice. So going back to the keynote this morning, you know, the example of the dog was one of the best ones I've ever heard in my life. I thought that was outstanding. I know that I've had people behind me with the cattle prod trying to push me out into the street, no matter what my dog is saying. My sponsors, my end users, the legislative staffers, trying to get you out there when they can see that there's a bus coming, but that's not their interest. It's my job to actually to run that. So once you've got that stood up, now you have to maintain it. So one of the things that we're doing is we're actually trying to make that part of the career path in the department. Where does it sit? We heard some people say PMO, could be in your enterprise architecture office, could be under, you know, the IT organization, could be under the business organization. I'm not sure that it matters, but what matters in our organization is that the line of business owners believe that it matters. Not where it is, but that it matters. Trying to make a career path. So if they've got folks they're grooming to be wardens, associate wardens, you know, executives over HR, no matter what it is, run them through this organization for a couple of years. Let me invest in them. I'll teach them some of the technology. I'll teach them some of the skill sets. I'll teach them how the stuff works together. And they'll be better for it when they get into their role as actually running a part of the organization. A warden that comes in and knows why the engine runs will be much more effective in his job. So we're rotating people through. I bring in lieutenants. I bring in facility captains. I bring in the case records folks. All the different business disciplines. I don't try to train them up as IT people. I bring in the actual line of business folks that have been there and done that and had the real world experience and the real world problems. So they can come back to us as an IT project and say, yeah, that's what the specification says, but if you actually build that, you're going to hit a wall or go down in flames. It's that level of integration with the line of business that I think you've got to have from your business analyst. And to a huge extent, they're my conscience. If you know, picture the little guys on your shoulders. They're the ones in your ear saying, yeah, that's, you know, the requirement said that, great. The contract says that, that's nice. The contract was written how many years ago? And we just had legislation changes or whatever it is, or it just really doesn't work that way. And so they're kind of your litmus test, but it only works if they actually know the line of business.
Do your business analysts get to carry guns?
Actually, some of them. I have, besides the organization, my correctional officers, they are actually, and I have to make sure they stay current in their training to carry the pepper spray. My parole agents actually carry a sidearm. So every once in a while, you come into my project building, you'll see a guy literally in a flak jacket carrying a pistol on his hip. It kind of sets the tone sometimes.
He gets his documents signed off on it.
Yes, it does help sometimes.
I work at Justice, so we see guys walk around with guns all the time.
Yeah.
Question.
All right, thank you, Russ. Tim, you want to jump in?
You know, I feel like we're talking to them, and I would like to know
Yes,
what the kind
right.
of things that, you know, part of taking advantage of a panel is just throwing out stuff. So, I mean, we don't really want to preach to you. We just, what kind of things do you think you need, and do you work, you know, how can we help you? Because you're obviously here because you're interested in this field. So, you have any?
I have a question. Eric made a comment about being able to whisper into the king's ear and
Yeah.
to, you know, get that type of decision making. And I think how do we empower business analysts to be able to have access to that ear, or to be able to message in such an influential way that, yeah, this is the right way to go?
That's a wonderful question. So one of the things that we've tried to do, and we have about 60 or so people on the project right now, and we're still in the procurement phase, but we're going through all these pre-implementation activities. What we've really worked hard to do is try to flatten the organization so we're not rigidly hierarchical. I really want to push the decision-making out to the right level. So someone once shared with me one of the issues that came up with, do you all remember what happened when Microsoft rolled out Vista, the operating system? Yeah, it didn't go very well. And one of the things that I'd heard was, you know, some project manager asked his staff, like, how are we doing? Oh, this is terrible, it's never gonna fly. Even if you doubled our resources, it's never gonna happen. The next guy, you know, asks, well, what's gonna happen? Well, it doesn't look too good. You know, we might have to augment some of the staff. It's not looking great. I don't know what's gonna happen. As the message gets up to the top, it's all systems go because it gets sanitized, right? And so you really sometimes have a breakdown between the people up in the ivory tower and the people who really know best. I mean, another friend of mine, he was an engineer at NEC, and he said there was a consultant that came in and got paid tons of cash to come up with ideas. And he said his secret was he just went down to the line and asked people, hey, what do you think would make your job easier? So we really try to flatten that org structure and empower. I really strongly believe in empowered, capable and empowered practitioners, and giving them the support that they need to make the decisions that need to be made. So they get to be king, so to speak.
I guess in some of my experience, it's that the person that does come the farthest gets to be heard the most because they're paid from, you know, that other side source.
Right.
But I guess what I've always told my team is, you know, if we have a concern or an issue, let's document it in a risk. Let's document it as an issue, because even if somebody's not hearing us, we have a written word. And
Right.
so I guess that's the only other thing that I could think of to get to that ear.
So one of the things we've started to do is you know how you have a steering committee? A lot of times the project manager will come to the steering committee and then the sponsors are there, right? We're going to start asking them to bring whoever the lead business analyst is there too. We want the business analyst to give us an opinion and a perspective outside of just the schedule and the budget. Because, you know, you're absolutely right. As the IT director with 28 departments under me, you know, half the time I'm just wondering what's real and what's not. And usually I find out what's real is on the way to the bathroom. I talk to someone doing the work.
Yeah.
And the hallway discussions is when I find out all the facts and the realities.
Yes. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
One of the things that was just said kind of under the covers, but I want to draw it out. Your project management staff have to be very adept at setting the culture that makes it okay for everybody to be heard and to collaborate. If the culture is that the consultant that came the farthest or has the most acronyms behind their name is smarter or better or, you know, whatever it is, then you're always going to struggle with that. And one of the things that I try to say over and over and over in our organization is this is a partnership. When we have a large contract on our project, but it's not a supplier-consumer relationship, it's a partnership. We'll get to the end together, or we both fail. And one of the things that we forget a lot of times is just because we have a contract that has requirements, the contract is only there to get you to the business outcome. I can successfully manage a contract get to the exit clauses or whatever it is, and I've executed that contract, but I haven't delivered what was necessary. It's the nature of that partnership and making sure they have that interchange. That the people that come in with the technical skill sets, with the facilitation skill sets, know how to draw that information out of the people that understand the business. And it really is an integrated process. And your project management folks have to make sure that's happening and coach into that and build that capability and that culture. If it's they're playing ping pong, well, so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that, that's not going to work. And that's a little bit of a fear with in the ear of the king. You want to make sure that is a proactive environment you're doing that in, not a in the ear of the king of this guy or these folks are doing this and I don't think it's right. But your PM folks should then drive that right back. Have those two people, if it's a conflict, spoken to each other and looked at each other eye to eye and work that out. Or if it's a different idea, or we should change this, really to facilitate that conversation process.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's about culture. I think it's about relationships and everybody trusting each other and having frank and open discussions. Because I think everybody's got a risk log, right? Everybody has a risk and issue log. But a lot of times what people obsess over and spend all their time talking about and their real problems don't ever end up in those things. Who's going to write in the risk log that the project director is a tyrant, right? Not on my project, So, we have to be committed to, look, we're not going to be perfect, we're going to make mistakes, but let's have just frank, open, real dialogue about what the issues are, what the challenges are, what the conflicts are, and really try to foster and nurture that kind of open communication. I think that is the best way, is really just setting the tone for the culture, and I think it does come from your project management.
If you three guys really believe that whole open and honest thing, it's been my experience that you're kind of in the minority. Because like she's alluding to, if you're open and honest, if you say, hey, the project's screwed or we're way behind or whatever, people don't want to hear that. Management doesn't want to hear it. That's why they hired IBM, KPMG, they pay all these consultants tons of money to tell you something that people sitting at this table already know. Because they're invested in it.
I beg to differ. I think that, unfortunately, the culture in a lot of departments have been ingrained, but trust me, nobody that is an appointed position wants to see something fail. So they'd rather know the truth so they can make corrective actions. It's a lot of times people are busy keeping their job, not doing their job. And if you're going to be an effective project manager or business analyst, or more importantly, a true change agent, then you got to do your job whether someone wants to hear it or not. Good, bad, and ugly syndrome. And if someone gets basically PO'd at you for doing your job, then you should stand up and wear that as a badge of honor, because you're a professional now.
And just to follow that on real quickly, I think one of the things you'll see with the three of us and with Deepa as well, you've got to have the ability or the confidence to take that on and take that risk. I would rather go in and stand my ground and tell my undersecretary or my secretary the real story, at the risk of having a stapler thrown at me or whatever heavy object is there. They can take the information, make a different decision. And at that point, I have a decision. If that really goes against my fundamental principles, that's information I need to have, and I'm going to choose to do something else. But the process builds a lot of rapport. When I walk in and I deliver that bad news and I give it factually and say, here are the options, or here's what I recommend, now I've built some rapport with those folks in the decision-making systems, and they've got additional input that I don't have. They're getting things, through the political system, through the funding system, whatever it is, that I may not see, and they may open my eyes and say, yeah, that's a problem, but here's the bigger one you're going to have. But it really is building that communication as well to make sure that goes on.
No, I agree with your guys' approach, 100%.
I'm sorry, I want to challenge them, okay, a little bit. Something I try to say to our analysts on projects, if they want to go and talk to someone higher up, is don't make it you as a person presenting this issue. Take the process model. We talked about the process model last time. Take your current process model, show where your knowledge applies to what's in that process model, and take that process model forward. Or it could be the use case, or it could be the data model, or it could be the set of business rules. and present that document and say, there is a disconnect between what we're doing and what that model or that use case or that data model says. So don't make it about you as an individual, make it about what the document shows, and force people to talk to the document, not talk to you. And it's not a personality or a power struggle now. It's about what does the document say. And so
I think what Steve's alluding to is when you don't get someone's ear is when you make an emotional argument. You know, passion goes a long way, and I believe that you have to have passion for your work. But when you want to when you bring something forward emotionally, it gets lost. So you really have to bring it forward in a fact-based way, and then know what was important to that decision maker when he started this effort, and show him that you're not probably going to get to the results you were hoping for, and here's why. But also, don't stop there. Okay, if that's the problem, then what are you recommending as the next step of correction? Because if you only bring me a problem, now you didn't give me something else. You're not doing your complete analytical analysis. So I agree with Steve totally. Speak for facts, speak for artifacts. Don't make it so complex that they can't understand it. Don't go on to bits and bytes, because you're going to lose them in day one. You know, so
This is an area where I think we really need to be harvesting the knowledge of those business analysts. When we're presented with a problem that we have to solve, I think one of the first things we need to do is make sure we go back to those folks that actually represent those lines of business and quantify that problem. Is a problem in one business silo, or how does that problem actually affect the entire department? You know, across that structure, that's your brain trust. They're the folks that actually can dissect that, help you figure out the breadth of the problem and what it really means. Something might seem like the biggest, baddest problem you got going, but if it impacts, you know, a very small portion of the business, maybe that's not the thing you run to your governance committees or your secretaries or whomever you have above you. But how does that impact things? Or maybe it changes the nature of the problem. Yeah, that's a problem over here, but if you fix it just on the surface without taking all those other business points of view into perspective, you could actually make it worse for somebody else or somebody downstream and actually break something else.
don't protect the status quo. That's why I'm a big believer in balancing the difference between bringing in subject matter experts and bringing in business analysts, and then mixing the two into this core competency unit, because sometimes you can be too close to something. So you want to make that mixture of both to be effective.
And Tim just mentioned something, the key to thought for me. We've been talking about subject matter experts, business analysts, and your vendor staff that have good skill set as well. This won't be true on all projects. It depends on size and complexity. We actually utilize all three. So we've got those business analysts. They're the folks at a fairly high level that understands the entire line of business. As we're working on specific functionality, we also go bring in subject matter experts that are temporary. They'll work with us for 6 months or 9 months or a year on a particular piece of functionality. They know the very detail of it, whereas my business analysts, they've been there, but they aren't getting into the nitty-gritty, very detailed stuff. They know the line of business horizontally across the entire organization. We use our vendor staff to kind of bring in the facilitation skill sets, the documentation skill sets, the process modeling, things along those lines. And that really becomes a very collaborative group that in our instance is necessary to have all three components to get to success.
Questions?
Who here's working on change requests or enhancements to an existing system?
Our team does it every day.
Right, the SAP people would be, right? Anybody here working on a build of a new system? All right, so we've got a mixture of the two, of the build versus the enhancement. Who gets assigned the responsibility for pursuing some newly discovered requirement? What's the impact going to be on the system? What's it going to cost if we take this as a change request and add it to the system? Is the vendor doing that, or are you doing that? Or is it a blended responsibility? Please speak up.
Yeah, I'm working on projects where we have a lot of in-house developers, and we have this question constantly: is this a minor enhancement to a system, or is it in fact a change request? So we've evolved over time. I'm more on the business side, but I work with the developers, and we're battling the developer's tendency to say, when a customer says, "Can you build it?" we're learning to say, "Tell us more about it, and tell us more about your benefit, and let's talk about, is it really a minor enhancement or a little addition to an existing system, or are we breaking out?" But what you guys are talking about, we face all the time, and that is that I end up with the developer wanting to please people, like a vendor at times wants to please the customer by saying, "Yes, we can do it." And in fact, as we heard in the keynote speech today, one of the things we want to say at first is, let's really talk about what we have before we ever talk about can we do it. We want to talk about why we do it. Sorry if I went on too long, but it's a really key thing if you're in a small department where you do some of your own developing and you do bring in some vendors. Vendors can be so easy to please that there's a quick yes answer, when I think at times we lose the sight of the really key benefit, the real pain points and problems we're trying to solve. And we end up, I end up living in that every day.
I think, Steve, you bring out a point that, and we want to make sure we delineate in this conversation. You can have a core competency area around, these are matrix folks where they're going to be business analysts that you matrix out to projects. They do the project and they play that role in the project. Then they come back, right? And then they're assigned another project. But the skill set of business analysts also applies to some verticals depending on some operations. So SAP is a ERP that requires a dedicated set of business analysts to really ingrain that. So sometimes you have operational type of business analysts that work with the business directly on a ongoing solution, and then other times you may want to have a matrix team of business for projects. And sometimes they'll cross over, and these will go with it and form that if it's a new solution. So make sure, we're not trying to say you have to have one centralized group. It's depending on what you're trying to do and what the result sets are. And so one of my pet peeves is why even have technologists in those early meetings, because I don't even want the business or the analyst to talk about any technology. So forget about the how we're going to do it. Just what are we trying to do? Those should be requirements. And so maybe keep some of the gearheads out of those rooms.
But I end up working for the gearheads, and so it's a culture thing. It's
Right.
one of those realities that I think a lot of us have here, which is to say, you guys present a great way to get it done. The reality is a lot of us revolving to get there in our organizations.
When you were making your example, I heard you say something about asking about what's going to be the benefit, or how do we measure what the benefit's going to be, and I saw Tim smile when you said that. Well, as opposed to, say, the contract developer might say, "Sure, we can do that," but you're asking, why do we want to do that?
And this is seen by program as a challenge at times. No, I think I know what I want to do. I just want you to get going and do it.
Right.
And I think the state pushing the stage 1 business analysis is a good thing, really good thing for some smaller organizations, because it does force you to go leave the technology completely out of it. Talk about what you're going to get your money back on. What's worth taking the risk, and what benefit are you going to get out of it?
So one of the biggest benefits you can do to any is help develop a set of criteria, whether it's a project or operation, whether it's a newly service request comes in for an existing solution. How do you make, what's your guidelines for making decisions and prioritizing that? So what's the set of guidelines? On a project, it's called change control guidelines, right? So you should do that operationally too, so that it's just not a first in, first out, and that's how resources basically get no value.
I'm happy to say we're evolving that direction.
That's good.
It's fits and starts. That's all.
Over 50% of the expenditures on a system will be made after it's implemented. And increasingly, we're seeing in the state on the large projects, over 50% of the implementation expenditure is identified after the contract is signed.
One of the things that Stephen started that question with was the change request process. And we try to be fairly rigorous about this. when somebody brings in a change request, very seldom is it actually a technical issue. So a lot of times they'll come in and say, do this very specific thing. Here's what I want you to do. Make this field bigger. Do something. Why? And it's almost going back to your childhood and asking, why? Well, what's the problem you're trying to solve? We'll kick those things back. If they can't tell us what the business problem is, what's this impeding? What's not happening? And the question that my staff hates, because I ask this all the time, what bad thing happens if we don't do this? Well, okay, it's an annoyance to one person out of 55,000 employees. Really? I'm going to fix that? What benefit are we trying to add by making this change? And it goes back to being able to make sure you understand the outcome of it and the fingers it has in the rest of the organization. But a change request should not be, 99% of the time, should not be a technical change request or a technical document first. It really is, bring in the business folks, maybe leave the technologists out of the room. They can quantify the how difficult, how much, but what first, what and why.
Focus on business architecture first, not technology architecture.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. Anybody want to throw one out for us? These people they're ready for you, so they're not afraid to speak their mind. They've proven that.
I just want to ask one question, just to see what the common practices out there. So for Eric and Russ, through your succession projects, do you have a scheduled approach to document and resolve issues on this? Or is it solely the project manager's responsibility or just based on the cultural organization?
If I understand the question correctly, you're asking what is our approach to documenting risks and then addressing them. Is that correct? Okay, so we have the formalized process. Of course, we keep everybody has a risk and issue log, and you track it, and you periodically, you review it and take things off or close them out. I think everybody does that, right? And you'd probably get in trouble if you didn't, because that's going to be, that's part of the CAPMM. It's just good practice, right? I think a lot of communication and collaboration ends up being risk mitigation, right? So if your culture is one where you're going to be frank and open about the challenges that you face, you're going to be on the natural mitigating and dealing with risks as they emerge. And so I think it goes back to that culture. I think it goes back to those relationships, and starting from the viewpoint that, I think success and failure often hinges on unmet expectations. And what that means is we really don't know the size of the bread box before we jump into what we're doing. And we really don't. And so when you take that attitude, if you say, hey, I want to build a system, and I come in and I say, I can do it in 2 years for $2 million, and we pull that off, I'm a big hero, and so are you, and we can all bask in the glory of success, right? But if it's 4 years and $4 million, we're probably basking in something totally different. And why? Because we didn't know the size of the bread box, right? And so we have to start off with the acknowledgement we don't know what we don't know, and that's where getting all your business analysts engaged and involved and asking why and trying to understand the true business problem, then applying technology to meet your business need. That's the way you go. So I think it's that culture, that collaboration, the starting off from the vantage point, we don't know what we don't know. I think that gives you a better perspective in terms of the size of the bread box. I hope that answers your question.
I think one of the other aspects of that, and I don't remember if it was Tim or Deepa that mentioned it, but empowering the folks to actually make decisions. When we look at our risk and issue logs, frankly, I don't want to see the task list for the project manager. They have got to be handling their line of business. I expect them to document things and to capture them, but I don't need to see every concern that they have. That as they escalate things, they had better be fairly meaty. Because if I have to talk about how you rearrange your desk or your operations manual, they're not doing their jobs. So some of that is making sure they feel empowered to do that, and not punishing folks when they make mistakes, but then coaching them through those. But make sure that process doesn't always escalate up, and you've got 90 pages of issues, or it's just so overwhelming that you can't get with it or get through it. I also make ours very public. As we're talking about different functionality, the big ones we have in our project status meetings every week in front of the entire project team. Now, if you keep it close to the vest and you're not telling anybody, then you're not engaging the folks that can help you solve them, whether they're from your technology side or your business side. So you do need a process, but you need to remember that the process doesn't get you to the solution. It's one of the tools that helps you get there. It's really the intellectual capital and the empowerment of the folks that can do it.
One last question. Entertain. Who wants to jump up?
I want to ask one.
Please.
So when you have business analysts, and you said that they've been around for a long time, you will have business analysts at different generational areas, levels in their career. How important is it to do the as-is business process, versus the 2B? Because there's people that come in and this is where we want to be. This is what we want to do. We want to change the way we do business. And then there's people that they like the way the business is done and they just want a new system that's faster that does exactly what this system does.
I think the person with the most generations under his belt should answer that question.
When I started off in this business a long time ago, I actually started off as a process reengineering analyst for a major firm. And they taught us that you go in and you do this big as is, right? As things have evolved and time to market, my belief is that you just need to do enough as is to have the understanding level that you need to move forward, to make sure that you have enough understanding. Because one of the concepts of civil engineering, system engineering is you do things in 30, 60, and 90. Because we all know the last 10% is called implementation. So you start doing that. So I think that you should not get caught up in having everything documented to the T and knowing every detailed business rules as is. You just need to have enough understanding to make major decisions if there's going to be a process change or how to take advantage of a new system or a new business direction and where maybe a policy change is needed or a practice change. Don't try to spend. If you spend 40% of your budget on the as is, you're screwed.
Let me jump in on that. With a focus on the 2B, before you actually launch into the project, you do need to do what Eric talked about, and that is find out what are all the systems that are out there currently. And a big takeaway I've gotten is that anytime you have a system that you want to replace, before the decision was made, a lot of little ad hoc systems have been built along the way. And if we're not aware of what those are and capture all them, then we're going to get in big trouble when we go to do our replacement. That's something I really got from all of this. So as is can be a technique to figure out what are all those little systems, but there are other ways of getting that as well.
And I think I just want to add one thing there, that when you talk about the as-is model, and I grew up in technology training to say you capture your current physical and your current logical and you go through that whole perception. That's an IT-focused model. Mm-hmm. Really, having these business analysts and having them know that in their head can skip you forward past that step. It's not nearly as important to document that and write it down. To Tim's point, if you wasted 40, 50% of your budget doing that, you don't have much left in the tank to actually accomplish changing anything. So it's having that concept and that business environment knowledge in your business analyst head that actually lets you leverage all that same information without having to kill trees and reams of paper to write what you think as is because by the time it hits paper, it's as was anyway. It's already changed.
And I think maybe your question when you talked about people who've been in an organization a long time and people coming new, and people from new always can see something different. And maybe, so your question about, then if you have that, people that are protecting status quo as part of your core business analyst skill set, you have the wrong people.
All right, so we're running into our time. Before I say thanks to our panel, I hope that you got some takeaways from here about the value of business analysis on projects. There's been so much focus in recent years on the PMO and the project management, but how can you manage the project if you don't know what the business is? And the business analysts are the linchpin that enable the managers to know what they need to be working on. But you've also been told it's hard work, but it can be not only rewarding work for now, but it's also can be an excellent stepping stone for wherever you want to take your career. And it's good to see so many of you here interested in business analysis, because those of us who've been around for a while really feel like it became a lost art form for too long, and with the focus on too many looking for silver bullets to solve our problems. And I think we're coming to grips with the reality that we've got to do good, solid blocking and tackling, understanding the business before we can set the direction for the automation project. So the fact that you're here and you're interested in this gives great hope for what can be done in this profession and in contributing to the success of our automation projects. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Russ and to Eric and to Tim for being our panelists on the second session, and Deepa in absentia from earlier. So thank you very much.